Michael Walker was born in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and received his BS in Forestry and Natural Resource Management in 1998 from the School of Forest Resources and Conservation of the University of Florida, where students help manage the research forest of 2,040 acres and prescribed burns in it every year. Moved to Maui in 2000 to serve as an intern at Haleakala National Park. From there, he worked with Maui Invasive Species Committee before moving to Oahu in 2004. After 2 years working as liaison from the Oahu Army Natural Resource Management Program to the Nature Conservancy's Honolulu program, he spent 2006 to 2017 with OANRP as a specialist and team coordinator. After reaching the conclusion that fire is the #1 threat to the preservation and conservation of mesic and dry ecosystems in Hawaii, Michael joined the Department of Land and Natural Resources Division of Forestry and Wildlife in 2017 as the statewide fire protection forester. Along with the task of managing the division's wildland fire program, Michael is also involved with the department's aviation program as a helicopter manager, course instructor, and unit aviation training administrator. While most of his work these days is in the office, he does get out to fight the occasional fire and maintain GOFA's 22 remote automated weather stations across the state. He also keeps his rappelling certifications up to date so he can still enjoy surveying the cliffs of Oahu for endangered plants when he has time. Michael, a round of applause.
Aloha mai kako. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been introduced successfully, so here we'll just get right into it. This talk today is about how did we get here. This is a history of fire here in Hawaii. So let's see. Go into the presentation mode. So prior to human arrival, the only natural ignition source in Hawaii was lava. There was occasional lightning strikes here, but as folks know, just living here a year or two, thunderstorms are quite rare. And so we don't really get very many lightning strikes at all. However, those hotspots don't stick around for long at all. Big Island is just a few 100,000 years old, and Hawaii's 6.5 million. Going out to Midway, it's 18 plus million years old, and then going up to the Emperor Seamounts at the beginning of the chain is 39 plus million years and beyond. So most of the plant evolution that occurred during this time had no fire had an impact on it, and therefore most of the species that we have here today are not fire adapted. That means that when they burn, they don't respond positively in terms of surviving the fire or having a seed set that reproduces. There are exceptions to that rule. Dodonea viscosa Hawi'i is one of those plants. It is cosmopolitan, I guess it's like pan-tropical, and it's found in the desert Southwest. It responds to fire. Sandalwood does resprout through its roots post-fire, but other than that, the majority of the species here in Hawaii are not fire adapted. So the people that became Kanaka Maoli arrived, and they begin to use fire as a tool to clear for agricultural purposes. That's mainly in the lowlands of Waikanaka areas, but once you get into Waiakula, fire for the most part was kept out of those areas. One, because it is the realm of the gods, and there's a lot of spiritual significance of these lands. There's a bunch of kino wao in the forests that represent the different gods and goddesses. And there's also very important resources that were highly coveted and protected. You can consider the mesic and dry forest kind of like the Ace Hardware of those days. Extremely dense hardwoods are found up there, and they're used for pole timber. They're used for tool making, used for weapons, and a lot of the birds that inhabit the forests at that elevation were used for the feather cloaks, helmets, standards, PE that were used for the Hawi'is. One thing that they did burn repeatedly, though, was some of the Kula lands for peely grass production. Peely grass is used for primarily for thatching of roofs, but and that a lot of those fires kind of, when they do ignite in the areas of like Ka'u today that still are peely dominated, the current land manager there, the National Park Service, lets some of those areas burn in order to kind of maintain it as peely grass. So, on European arrival, fire regimes and plant and animal compositions went through a rapid change. New species were introduced, particularly hoofed ungulates. They were gifted to the Hawi'i, and a tapu was placed upon these animals, and they were allowed to roam freely across the landscape without the threat of being killed. And they quickly populated, they're very fecund, and even to the point, so like a lot of Akamali at that time got tattoos of goats on them, sort of as a symbol of fecundity and high reproductiveness. But this also allowed for establishment of novel fuel types across the island chain. And also at the same time, sandalwood became a commodity that was traded with China in particular. And fire was used as a tool to open up the forest. And you could go in there and you could sniff out the sandalwood, harvest it, and also allowed for the easy transport of the sandalwood out of the forest. It was a really rough time for a lot of people that did work on the land because they were no longer working in their lo'i. They were conscripted to work up and gather sandalwood, and it's a time that's not looked upon with a lot of fond memories for a lot of people. But I wanted to kind of show this slide without any of the words, because this is the Waianae Mountain Range around the turn of the 20th century. And what you can see there is mostly grasslands. There's small pockets of forest that remain there, but for the most part, the bulk of the mountain has been converted into a grassland. And just to kind of drive the point home too, this is Manoa Valley in 1908, and you can see the lo'i down below, but you look up in the mountains, it's not what we really see today. It's a very dry and arid landscape because the animals are run freely where there's no fences, and they just roamed wherever they want and ate whatever they wanted. So despite the spread of these novel fuel types, there's also the rise of large-scale ranching and plantation agriculture in the late 19th century, mid-19th century through the 20th century. And the rapidly expanding plantation agriculture sector cooperated with government entities like the newly created territorial forestry. Fire wardens were created, and the plantations had the manpower, the machines, and most importantly, the water. And they were able to contain most of any of the fires that did spread out of the plantations and impacted the forest. So for a period of time in the 20th century, there was a relatively low occurrence of wildfire. Let's fast forward a little bit into some background information on really what kind of started the problem that we have here in Hawaii. Population in 1969 was around 750,000 folks, and 81% of those folks were in the city and county of Honolulu. Move forward to the 80s, the rapid development of the tourism industry. Hawaii's population is nearly 1 million at that point. And beginning in the 1960s, large-scale agricultural operations like sugar and pineapple and ranching drastically declined. HCNS's last sugar producer harvested its last crop in December of 2016. So the last census of 2020 shows that we have 1.45 million folks, and Hawaii population is more dispersed across the island chain, with only really 68% of the population being within the city and county of Honolulu. So here's a map of 1980s agricultural production. The light green is ranching and the purple is sugar. And you can see there's various other crops there as well. Fast forward to 2015 is a drastic reduction in the acres ranched at that point, as well as most of the sugar is gone from Oahu, Kauai, and Hawaii Island. But you can see there on the Isthmus of Maui, there still is 34,000 acres of sugar that's in production. But you go forward 2 more years and that 34,000 acres disappears. So here we have a video that we're going to show, just kind of illustrating the urbanization. This first video is of the Ewa Plain. So you can see the areas that were in pineapple and sugarcane start to urbanize. And this next example is of West Maui, starting in 1988. You can see the development begin to spread from Lahaina down south to Laniapoko. So which once was this and this becomes this and then that. So this is fountain grass, Penicillium sepaceum. It's highly adaptable to dry areas and is extremely fire prone. Readily ignites and has like a burn cycle where the top will burn and then the enders will smolder there for a bit and the base will burn again. And plantations that supported sugar and pineapple turn into this. So this is Megathyrus maximus. It's also known as guinea grass. It's another African grass. This one can grow 6 inches a day in optimal conditions, and 6-foot guinea grass can grow 20-foot flame lengths. So this was a part of what we call the grass fire cycle too, where these grasses ignite, they burn up to the forest edge, they burn some of the trees, and then as the trees die, they can't compete with the grass that grows 6 inches a day. And so once was forested becomes a savanna. This is occurring and has been occurring in Hawaii since the 19th century. Dryland forest ecosystems are the most endangered of all. There's really only about 2% now remaining, yet they're home to 40% of native land plants, insects, spiders, snails, birds, and even the bat. So this problem was known to foresters and anyone that worked up in the mountains and ranches for over 150 years. This is a report that I pulled out of the office today, and I wanted to show the Capitol in the background because it's very important to the discussion that we're going to have. So 1908, there was a proposed forest fire fund that would allow the territorial forestry department at that time the ability to pay for fire suppression efforts. Currently, at that time, they had no money to fund any kind of fire suppression. And as you can see here as well, goats back then were an issue as they are today. So it's important to read right here that practically no damage has been sustained through forest fire, where in every case where a fire has started, it's just been quickly checked and extinguished. Just how much of this is due to the forest fire law and to the better public sentiment in regards to forest fire that has been aroused thereby is hard to say, but probably not a little of the immunity from damage from fire is due directly or indirectly to the efforts that have been exerted under law. Here's the proposal for $5,000 in 1908 for the fire funds that would be drawn on in case of need to provide for this expense. That's around $30,000 or so in today's money. But so as long as there is no appropriation, the chief fire warden is practically powerless to take effective measures to stop fires that may start at any moment and do untold damage. This is the urgent need and should not be passed unnoticed by the legislature. There was fires that year in Tantalus, on Molokai. Some important points here reads as follows. The forests of Hawaii make possible the assured supply of water, without which the economic prosperity of the territory would come to a standstill. Water from the forest reserves is now used chiefly in connection with the main industry of the territory, the production of sugarcane. But as has repeatedly been pointed out, for the continued success of agriculture in Hawaii, whatever the crop, there must be water. This point of view has been especially emphasized during the past year by the authoritative statements made by the Honorable F.H. Newell, Director of the United States Reclamation Service, during his trip onto the island in the autumn months. An impartial opinion from such an authority is conclusive. It is obvious that the water is of crucial importance in the development of the territory. Without the forest, a continued supply cannot be maintained. Hawaii cannot afford not to make the forest do their full duty. And this can only be accomplished by providing the necessary men and women and means to bring the forest to the state of the highest efficiency and to keep them there. Money invested in bringing in the Hawaiian forest to their highest state of usefulness is as surely invested as if it went to buy high-class bonds. This problem was, for the most part, a problem of the foresters and the ranchers in those days. But here we are today, where what we're looking at right now is what's called the wildland urban interface. You have former plantation lands that have been parceled up. The most profitable farm product that you can grow in Hawaii today is a housing development. However, we lack the building codes and laws that would keep communities safe by creating fire breaks around them or governing actually how agricultural land is developed and managed. So I don't know if you can't really see in this photo right here, but nearly every single one of those green dots that's out there has a giant swimming pool. And each of those is a beautiful green lawn that's maintained by a water resource that used to provide for the water to Lahaina, which was known in the 19th century as the Vienna of the Pacific. There was mo'i, springs, canals. It was a beautiful site, according to most folks that documented it from that time. It was also the Kingdom of Hawaii of those days at one point. So for those of you who've never really seen a guinea grass fire in action, we're gonna take a look. This is on Camille Road, which is between Barracks and Eva. This is all former sugar and pineapple plantation. And now they're at guinea grass. So we'll start planes approach the highway. See the scale, plane lengths versus fire trucks and our things are starting to heat up. The normal trade wind day, this isn't anything special. Probably around 20 mile an hour. So see what's back. You increase the wind speed or funnel that fire. So 98+% of our fires are human induced. Remember, lava is an ignition source that doesn't stick around that often. Lightning is an ignition source, but we don't see that very much at all. 30% probably of those fires are arson, but because of the lack of investigators that we have, most of those guys they work at the county fire departments and they are really tasked with inspecting homes, making sure they're up to code, making sure that then they investigate any kind of structural fire. So that's really their focus. Have that many guys that are able to go out on scene on a wildfire. So there's a map of the state here, and because of the 98% of ignitions are human caused, fires rapidly are ignited in areas of human population. So we saw that map of the development of Eva Beach. You can see that's a bright yellow because wherever you have humans next to fuels, that's where you're going to get fire. And you can also see those bright areas on leeward Maui as well. So, as I was talking about that increase in human population and dispersal, along with the decline of agriculture in the state, you can see from the year 1960 all the way to 2020 that as the agriculture declines, fire increases in frequency and size. And just to put it out on a map, you can see that everything that's in the orange to black color has occurred from 2015 on. So the other component of that is that we're with the effects of the changing climate, we're seeing longer drought periods, and we're seeing more fires across, particularly Maui. You can look at the isthmus there. What's once was 34,000 acres of planted sugar is the bulk of it remains fallow. The new landowner is planting as much as they possibly can, but they just can't scale up as fast as they need to in order to put plants and irrigated crops on the landscape there. So those years on Maui have really produced a significant number of fires. What do we need to do? The first thing is I always try and tell people that Hawaii really has a fuels problem, not necessarily a fire problem. Well, every ignition is human caused. We wouldn't have fire without the fuel. And so reducing the amount of fuel that we have on the landscape by multiple means, using mowing, using herbicides, using grazing animals to reduce the fuels, whatever we can, however we can, we need to be able to reduce these fuels. But to say that fire is a Kako thing. It takes everyone to be able to prevent a fire. Having the fire department show up at your house is the last thing you want to happen. There's things that folks can do around their homes, what we like to call defensible space, is reduce the amount of plant cover directly adjacent to your home to almost nothing. And then out into your yard, make sure the yard is clear of any tall grasses, any kind of leafy debris. Limb your trees up to around 6 to 10 feet so that if a fire does burn in your yard, that it's not going to ignite the tree that's in your yard and potentially burn your house down. And then beyond that, there's thinning of the forest. And then here on our landscape, particularly managing grass fuel out beyond that. There was a lot of people that were really concerned that the trees that were in their yard were going to burn their house down, and people were starting to cut some of their trees down in their yard, and we really want to influence people not to do that. It's just really the right plants in the right places. So selecting the right trees and having them placed in the right places in your yard can make a big difference. Particularly canoe plants, things like ulu, maya, noni, they're wonderful. They provide food. They're really moist. They hold a lot of moisture content within them. They're less likely to burn than a lot of things. And just keeping it irrigated. Also, you can see right adjacent to the home, there's a bunch of rocks. A great example is this house right here in Lahaina. This is an old plantation era house. It's single wall construction. It was a lot like a lot of the houses that did burn down in Lahaina. However, there's some key differences here. You can see that other than the plumeria tree, there's really no trees that are adjacent to the house. There's rocks that are right forming a border around the house, and there's a brand new metal roof that's on the house. This is basically the entire neighborhood around it. There's a lot of luck involved here for this house as well, that the flame fronts didn't burn on the side of the house and ignite it. But there's also, because of that rock barrier and things, that there was nothing adjacent to the house that could set the house on fire. It helped the house survive. That's it for my presentation, but I'd like to open it up to questions or comments or any input that anybody has.
Thank you, Michael. So Michael will be calling on people in the room for questions, and as questions come in online, I'll go ahead and just flag down your attention, Michael, and pass those along as well, so that you don't have to monitor the chat.
Okay, cool.
The ignition source in Milwaukee most recently.
It's still under investigation. One of my coworkers was out there and he did find a little camp stove fuel tank that was out there. Might not have been that, might just been a fire that was on the ground. I probably think that was had something more to do with it. It's usually when we're called to a fire up at Mokulehia Forest Reserve, there's the Kulo'okala Road out there, and there's 4-wheel drive access from Keawaula or the Yokohama area that you can drive up, and the majority of the fires that are up there, there's a little fire ring that people think they put rocks around the fire, it's going to protect it from spreading, but they never put the fire out, they just leave it, and they drive away, and then there's ironwood needles right next to it. The wind picks up, blows the embers into the ironwoods, and it's off to the races.
You mentioned kind of like a lack of policy for development on agricultural land. Is there any policy that prevents certain types of development on agricultural land?
There is zoning, agricultural zoning, that limits the number of structures that can be placed on different size acreages of agricultural land. But there has been some creative workarounds. I think the Kumialoa area is probably the best example of that, where the developer had groups of people form limited liability corporations to Hawi'i up, and they kind of subdivided, or not even really CPR'd the land through these Hawi'is, so they were able to get on the landscape with leases and be able to farm those parcels, and some of them, or the majority of them, have built structures there that don't quite fit within the zoning for the city and county. That's kind of been a template for some people to follow, which is unfortunate because you know what, how would we produce less than 5% of the food that we eat in the state? So as people are occupying these lands and living on them, they're driving up the price of agricultural land, driving up leases, really reducing the ability for farmers to actually grow something and produce a food crop and make any money. You combine that with cost of water and agricultural theft, and it's extremely difficult to be able to farm in a way these days and make any money.
We have a question online. Well, a comment from JB Friday. If you zoom in on Google Earth now, you can see the destruction in Lahaina, but also the house that you showed, and in case folks are interested in that. And then from Sam Poole, who's a contracts instructor in the department and had his class join in online today. So he said, nice presentation. What, if any, liability or responsibility do the fellow landowners on the former plantation land have?
So the large landowners that are in Lahaina are Kamehameha Schools and several corporations that are run by Peter Martin that have different names. They're kind of land banking right now, where they're holding these agricultural lands fallow, so they're paying reduced taxes in the hopes of one day being able to develop them. So there's no active farming that's occurring on these lands. That may also be an issue, as well as not being able to get water to them, water rights, but a lot of the water that is feeding that development of the Launiopoko area is from the old system that Peter Martin has been able to utilize. So currently, each county has different ordinances that dictate how you manage fuels on your land, and currently the penalties just aren't really there to inspire anybody to actually take the time. And there's a lack of inspectors, like I said earlier, that are out and about looking at these things. It's really complaint driven and not a whole lot of enforcement. So there's no state law currently that would be able to be enforced. So some of the proposals that are going to be going up this legislative session are to include a wildland urban interface code for the state that then the counties can modify and adopt, that might put some teeth into those penalties. And I think there's a lot of people though that have kind of woken up at just driving around on Oahu, have seen things that were once overgrown with guinea grass and halekoa be starting to get mowed and maintained. Real good example of that's in Hawi'i and Waialua, the right next to the weed circle, that an entire parcel has been chopped down to less than knee high and has been cleared. And also right adjacent to the old sugar mill in Waialua has been mowed and cleared. That spot used to light up all the time. People would steal cars, drive them in there, strip them, set them on fire, start a wildfire. Yeah, and also the Department of Land and Natural Resources gets historically less than 1% of the budget that we have in the state, and Division of Forestry and Wildlife gets a little sliver of that, and then the fire program gets a little sliver of that. So that $5,000 that the forester was talking about in 1908, at one point prior to my employment with the division, there was a suppression budget of $0 for wildland fire. And I think when I started, it was around 600,000. And working with the legislature and the department and the governor, we've been able to increase those funds, but they're still insufficient for the problem that we're facing. So we're hoping that this session right now, there's going to be a lot of changes in the laws, and there's going to be a lot more funding for fire programs at the state and county level.
We have 2 questions online, but maybe we can take a question or 2 in the room before we go back to the online questions.
This one, like on the mainland, you're gonna think of like wildland fire suppression and responsibility, like there's a lot of agencies that have a lot of resources to do that, right? Like the US Forest Service, other ones. So here in Hawaii, it seems like it's mainly up to the fire departments, and I guess you guys have some of that. Are there other agencies here in Hawaii that are able to work on fire suppression and fuel reduction, or do we need more agencies, or does your office just need more funding?
Yeah, so the county fire departments are our first line of defense. Everyone calls 911 whenever there's a fire, and they've got a fair amount of resources. City and County of Honolulu's fire department is within the top 10, like size wise, like 14 battalions across the island. It's heavily staffed. They've got 2 helicopters right now. So they're the main firefighters when it comes to any fire response, no matter whose land it occurs on. Division of Forestry and Wildlife is a militia style firefighting force. So that means that everyone has their day job of forester, wildlife biologist, botanist. That's their blue sky duties. And then there's about 120 of us that are trained to fight fire. So we switch our hats when we get the call, particularly if the fire is on our land, then we assume command once we mobilize, but it takes everybody a while, particularly if they're out in the field that day, to drive back to the base yard, start mobilizing the equipment, and then driving out to the fire. So initial attack is not our strong suit. We're pretty slow to mobilize, so we rely heavily on city and county to do that. There are federal resources on island. There's Fed Fire. There is a wildland fire crew that's at Schofield Barracks that's supposed to respond to fires on their lands. Prior to Lahaina, it was difficult to access and mobilize Department of Defense air assets for fires, but Maui has changed that significantly. For anybody that's seen the fire that was going on above Nini on Imalka, that there was quite a number of DOD and Hawaii National Guard air assets on that fire, and they continue to be on standby for it. And then there's also State Airport Rescue and Fire, that their primary duty is the airports, but they did support Maui. They support Division of Forestry and Wildlife, the Olinda Fire on Maui, as well as the Maui County folks up in Upcountry. So they were on that fire, but yeah, there's going to be some conversations in terms of whether Division of Forestry and Wildlife maintains a militia firefighting force, or we start hiring more full-time fire people where their job, when there's not a fire, is to do fuel reduction, and when there is a fire, they just go directly to the fire with their brush trucks. So I'm currently the only 100% fire focused division employee. And there are protection foresters at each branch, but their duties are split between forest health and fire. So they have a lot going on with rapid ohia death and ungulate control in the forest reserves. Yeah, I think that we're underfunded. You know, my budget is around $3.2 million in state funds that I can use. And you could use that in a day in California on a fire. So we're underfunded, understaffed in terms of people for fire.
We have 3 questions online. I might go ahead and try to make it through a few of these. One is from Jesse Adams, the Ko'olau Mountain Watershed Partnership Planner. Do you have any suggestions to expedite access for fighters to our partners' properties? And what can our landowning members do to assist fire response?
I think the first thing that they can do is that they have fuels on their property, that they should be maintaining them as best as they possibly can. And there are competitive federal grants that they can apply for that could help them do that. Last legislative session, I asked the state to give me give the Division of Forestry and Wildlife $1.5 million in funds to start a fuel reduction program. And I was going to use that seed money primarily on Division's land, because we manage over 1 million acres in the state, and we have a lot of fuel on our property that we need to maintain to protect not only the forest, but the communities that are adjacent to us. And then I was hoping to build upon that, to one day the state would be able to have its own grant programs for private landowners, where, because there's a lot of restrictions with the federal funds, they're harder to get. We have to compete. One program we have to compete with 13 other Western states. The other current program that we have to compete with is more robust. We have to compete with 49 other states. So, and like I said, guinea grass grows 6 inches a day, but most of the reentry for fuel reduction projects in the 48, lower 48 in Alaska. Once you go in and you make a fuel break, you don't have to worry about going there and maintaining it for every 5 years or so. But if you cut a fire break in grass, you have to be out there at least quarterly to be maintaining that, or you're going to lose it and not necessarily going to have an effective fire break at all at that point. So, one that can, you know, try and do their best as good neighbors to maintain the fuels. Giving their contact information to the fire department, making sure that the fire department either has their own lock on the gate or they have the codes to access that land. Giving the fire department and forestry and wildlife information about water resources that are available on their property, whether it be a reservoir or a tank, or any kind of water system that would help them fight the fire during fire suppression. Yeah, and then contacting Hawaii Wildfire Management Organizations, a nonprofit that works statewide. They work across the Pacific as well, just trying to engage people about being fire safe and fire wise and managing fuels on their property.
The next question is from Garrett. Great presentations. In some of the higher elevation fires in the forest reserves, it doesn't seem like the fallow land invasive plant cycle is as big of a factor. Why are those fuels now susceptible to fire when they historically were not?
So Liliani Malka is a perfect example of how climate is impacting fires in Hawaii. So during extended periods of drought, Uluhe fern, which is the predominant understory in that forest, cures. And it's got a really thick duff layer underneath it. Anybody that's swam through the Uluhe in any kind of bushwhacking situation knows that there's a relatively thick layer of dead material underneath the green. And, you know, we had a really dry summer, and even though it was October, we had no rain. And whenever that stuff kicks off, it burns underneath the green, preheats the green, burns that, continues on until it hits a tree. Sandalwood just explodes underneath that. I don't know if it's the oil content or what, but there's a fire in 2018 on Kamehameha School's land in the Wailoa training area that's leased to the Army that burned for several days in the exact same kind of conditions. It was a drought. It didn't go out until it got rain on it. So, yeah, it's a changing climate that's now threatening our wet forest as well as music and dry.
Maybe that's a good segue to the last question we have for the moment from online folks, then we can take some more in-person questions from, this one's from Jen. Very interesting presentation, thank you. Is there talk about benefits in restoring land back to pre-European native plant communities, or because it's a fuels and ignition problem, would the best thing to do be to reduce the fuel load?
Yeah, those conversations are happening all the time, and when you work in forestry, you really work on like a 25, 50 year, 100 year timeline. And we have, you know, well over 150 to nearly 200 years of this process of the forest being reduced and changing into a savanna. And it's going to take a long time for that process to be reversed. And it's not necessarily going out and planting trees directly in the grass. You still have a fuel problem at that point. You could do all the preservation and planting and everything that you want, but if you're not managing these fuels, you're going to lose all that time and effort and value that you're putting back into the landscape. So it's going to be like a staged process where you're going to have to maintain fuel breaks, you're going to have to maintain fuels while you're commencing your outplanting, and you're not going to get the benefit of those trees until they get tall enough of a canopy where they can close the canopy and they can shade out a lot of the grass. But even when you do have that, you're still going to have these fuels constantly coming in underneath the canopy.
do you have any data on whether the frequency of lightning has increased over the last number of decades with climate change?
On the Kona coast, like Pu'uwa'awa area, there has been a number of lightning strikes that have occurred over there that I need to look back on the old historical data to see. But there has been documented lightning ignitions in Honolulu and Pu'uwa'awa that seem to be novel. And I don't know if that's just a glitch there or if that's a new trend that we're seeing. So I don't think.
I mean, just in my lifetime, it just seems like it never had lightning events growing up. Now that it is a lot more frequent, but I just don't know if there's anything. I mean, data driven.
Yeah, there's like a lightning network across the West that they have the capacity to pinpoint lightning strikes. And so, but we don't really have that system out here, but maybe it's something that we should start looking into more. It seems to me and other people like yourself that like we're getting more lightning these days. Even I've only been here 23 years, but it definitely seems like the last 5 to 10 more lightning has been occurring.
Yes, I have a question of my own too, if no one else has one. So we have a room full of students. So a lot of these are graduate students, probably 80-90% of the people here are graduate students. A number of undergrads here with us today too. And you know, they're going out in the world to make their difference in the next year or two. And this seems to be a problem of scale, as well as land ownership, right? So there's access issues and who has authority to fix this problem. But you know, if you were to come up with a way to like fix the wildfire problem in the Hawaiian Islands, get back to native dominated systems, whatever. What do you want to challenge these students with in their lifetime to accomplish? You've got a whole army here. What do you want to see?
Just the fact that you're here is wonderful. That you have an interest in these issues, that you have an interest in Aina management, and that's the first step. Really, is having a passion about it and understanding the wonderful, unique environment that is here in Hawaii and how precious little we have left of it. That's step one. Learning about this, knowing the species, knowing the values at risk, not just the communities that we have, but the plants and animals and the cultural connection to the forest. It's very important to know all about that. And then also there's a lot to learn from the fire community as a whole around the world. I think going to college and learning about the ecosystems that you want to protect here, and then if you have the opportunity to spend your summer on a wildland fire crew, learning about fire, how people deal with fire in different areas, and that would be a wonderful combination of experience that I wish I had more of. And then there's tons of stuff to learn through the different fire exchanges that are across the United States and the Pacific Fire Exchange here. There's a lot of information out there to gather, and there's a lot of experiences to have, and going out and working with one of the watershed partnerships, being a Kupu intern at Forestry and Wildlife, the Oahu Army Natural Resources has an internship program, going out and experiencing what it's like, because when you're trying to do forest restoration work, a lot of people are like, why don't we convert everything to native? And it's like, you really gotta like get your hands dirty to really know what's that like, and trying to figure out how to scale that up to the level that we actually need to do that is a really tough question to answer. And then biocontrol is another huge part of a missing puzzle piece that we have about what's going to be able to slow these grasses down. You know, when we actually have been restoring and planting these areas and keep those grasses from invading and building up fuel underneath these remnant forest patches we have as well as the new ones. That's another big piece that we need to solve.
So we're approaching 4:30, and so I'm sure we have many questions we could continue asking. I'm wondering, Tom, can I put you on the spot? Do you want to ask the last question? So you've thought a lot about thinking about these changes over the long term, what's going to happen, and this is one of the implications of the work that you do.
Yeah, Mike, nice to meet you in person. We talked, over the past month or two about how monitoring, can benefit the work you do, and I know you're involved in getting monitoring out there. You know, we're building the Hawaii MesoNet, which is a statewide system. It's not focused just on dry areas or fire prone areas, but you know, do you have any recommendations, or can you say anything about how important it is to improve our monitoring to be able to issue warnings and manage fires progress?
Yeah, the more weather stations we have on the landscape, the more detailed our data can be, will be as granular. We'll be able to kind of fine tune it. Most the red flag warnings that we issue for the state, they all occur on one weather station at Honolulu International Airport. But many of the areas on Leeward Maui, Leeward Hawaii Island, Leeward Oahu can be in red flag conditions way before H&L will be. So dispersing, having more data collected across the landscape, we could actually fine tune the red flag warnings more. So we could say it's a red flag warning for Maui, or, you know, like kind of tune that in better. And then knowing a little bit more about how the fuels react with fire across the Hawaiian landscape is something that really needs to be tuned in as well. Dr. Tronick's been working on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.